ADA and universal design is not actually universally accessible. My hot take this week is not really a hot take for occupational therapy practitioners who work in accessibility. ADA requirements and universal design are not just for elders, and they're not actually universally accessible. Ramp access to public spaces for those who can't take the stairs? Cool. Applies to both individuals with disabilities and parents with strollers. High contrast colors to identify level change? Also good for both. So what does it actually mean to design an inclusive community? Who is most often left out of these decisions? And how does the process differ from city to state to national levels? Giving us more insight into this topic is another fellow OT, Francisco Lasta. Welcome to the Aging Together podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Pooja A, Patel, a double board certified occupational therapist and gerontologist with additional certifications in dementia and fall prevention. This season, we are unfiltered. In this podcast, I interview guests who are experts in their fields or caregivers who are sharing their lived experiences. Let's meet today's guest. With a clinical background spanning pediatrics to aging adults, Francisco brings deep insight into how to create more welcoming, supportive environments that work for a wide range of users. He directs the firm's inclusive design program, developing tools for architects and collaborating on projects that include transit stations, airports, sensory rooms, and inclusive restroom design. As an occupational therapist with nearly 2 decades of experience in his field, his work is grounded in how people actually engage with the spaces around them while highlighting the power of design to enable meaningful participation for people with diverse abilities and identities. He has presented at South by Southwest, AIA Chicago, the American Occupational Therapy Association, NeoCon, and the Symposium to Re-Envision the Center for Universal Design, among many other speaking engagements, and has co-authored both a publication and a book chapter on inclusive design. Francisco also leads GFT's Inclusive Design Internship Program, creating pathways for OT students to apply their skills in real-world design projects. He is also a member of Best Bases Design Institute's Technical Advisory Group, where he helps shape a new community-informed design standard grounded in research, accessibility, and equity. Francisco, with how busy you are, thank you for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Pooja.
That is a wonderful list of things that you do for the community. Let's start with your hot take.
Well, my hot take is that, as you've mentioned, accessibility, universal design, and inclusive design, they're not the same, but it doesn't mean you have to choose either or. You can stack them together so that your approach to design is a lot more powerful.
That's really interesting. So I guess for the audience who's not OT and doesn't work in accessibility and design, let's explain sort of how this came to be, right? So we have the ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act, which required public spaces to be accessible. And what that meant at that time was a ramp entrance.
A ramp entrance, of course, the railing, and it's really focused on the physical aspect of the built environment. And a lot of it is the access in terms of being able to get in and out of a building. There are, like right now, there are things that are included for people with visual impairment or vision loss, but a lot of it is still about like physical access and vision. You rarely see things that are outside of those things. And one example would be, what about the sensory part of access? What about the cognitive part of access? We're not just physical beings. We're sensory beings as well. We're thinking beings, we're emotional beings, psychological beings. Like we are so multifaceted that our built environment should also serve that kind of in order to be supportive.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's where, like, yes, we see like the crosswalk sounds for visual impairment, right? We see the textured walkway entrance and exit so that visually impaired can use their sticks or use their textured boots surfaces to know that, okay, this is a crossing, right?
Yes.
We have braille lettering on in public buildings where necessary, right? So yes, a lot of that stuff is revolved around the physical and the visual aspect of access.
Which is important because we're physical beings.
Yes.
We have to go from point A to point B. But now that we have like a better understanding of what our needs are as humans, then we have to also change how we approach designing our built environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, so it's important to understand, like, that's where things started, right? Like, that's
Right.
where accessibility started, and it has evolved significantly since
right.
then. Before we go into what it is today, I also want to talk about, so when I was in school, we learned universal design and the seven
Universal design,
principles of
right.
universal design. I know that's not the norm anymore either, at least not within the OT space. So for our audience, what is universal design, and how does that interact with ADA?
With ADA, okay. If I can simplify things a little bit. So when you think of ADA, it's like minimum, like buildings have to meet the minimum requirements. And like the usual conception of accessibility or ADA is that like you have a separate design or build space for people without disabilities. And then you have a separate design space or a separate design feature for people with disabilities. So it's like a dichotomy. So that's why you will see like, oh, there's a stairs and there's a ramp on the other side. And sometimes it's located like way too far from the main entrance, right? And you can even see that in technology. Like there's like, you have to adjust the setting to make it accessible instead of like, it's all there. Like everyone can use the accessibility feature of it, and it just makes the whole experience like so much better. Right. So that's like, there is like that dichotomy in the traditional way of like approaching things with accessibility. But when you think of like universal design, and you veer away from that separation, so you have this like shared solution. But a lot of times it still is focused on the physical space. Right. So accessibility, universal design, that's like a lot of focus on the physical space. But when you think of inclusive design, and the word inclusive, you're considering several factors, not just the built environment. You're considering the technology aspect of it, even the schedule, the policies, procedures, even the climate. You have to consider all those things to be able to come up with a solution that not only meets the needs of people with disabilities, but what about pregnant mothers? What about, like a non-disabled person who's just like, is having a headache or a temporary injury? How can the environment still be supportive of their needs? So like you have those different components happening because again, we're not just physical beings. We have all those different needs. And the way we can design our environment is being able to be cognizant what those needs are. What are those pain points? And I'm sure you have probably experienced like navigating a space that is just frustrating. Right? Like
you take any airport in the country.
Yes, and those are like large scale buildings and they typically would be so complex, a lot of signage. You don't usually know where to go right away when you're entering the building, and then when there are maps, sometimes it's like difficult to figure out like where am I? Right? And also like they could have like a very similar look. Like it's not very distinct that you will remember that that's going to be the spot because they all look the same. So how confusing can that be?
Yeah. My least favorite maps are malls. The malls who have like the vertical maps on the posters. And then they have like the different levels and they show you like the 3 levels and then kind of show you where you are. But then they have it broken into like numbers and colors and stuff. But then you have to read all of the like the key at the bottom to identify what the colors are, what number you're looking for, and then where it is in relation to where you're standing. And then you don't know if you're supposed to go turn right or turn left or like it like I think it's so confusing. And for me, I'm like, if I think it's confusing, I imagine it's confusing for a lot of people. And that's like for a neurotypical able-bodied person to be able to navigate that. Malls are huge places. They're not small where you're like, oh, if I walk in the wrong direction for 2 minutes, I can just turn around and go the other way. Like you're going to end up on the other side of the mall. And then have to go all the way back to the other side where you were trying to go.
And that's a very common problem. And that's why a lot of large-scale buildings like airports are actually now looking at passenger experience because what you have described is like a negative experience, right? Like you're confused. You don't know where to go, especially when you're in a hurry. Right? Sometimes you don't know where the bathroom is when you need to use it at that moment and you can find a single bathroom nearby.
I can tell you a story about that. We just took a trip out of state to go visit a family member and we went to a mall and I kid you not, it was so hard to find restrooms. Like they were like hidden into like nooks.
Yes.
There was no signage on the main hallways,
Right.
like, or in the open area. It was like once you went into that off like hallway, then you could see the sign for restrooms.
Yeah,
But if
yeah.
you're standing all the way over here, you have no way of knowing that the
Yeah.
restrooms were in that nook.
Yeah, yeah.
It was so confusing and so frustrating.
Exactly. So it's already affecting your ability to access the amenity.
Yeah.
So that is an accessibility issue.
Right, from the entrance.
Yeah, from the entrance. And that's why when I talk about accessibility, I always talk about accessibility is only as strong as its weakest point. When there is a break, and like we mentioned, don't see the signage, you don't know where the actual space is because it's hidden, then that's already a barrier. Then it's really not accessible because you're unable to use it at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that prevents people from wanting to explore, wanting to go there again.
Exactly.
It makes it that much harder for them to function in spaces that they would like to access.
But they would like to access.
But can't because
Exactly.
of XYZ reasons.
Yeah,
and that shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah. And can you imagine older adults being in that situation where you could be in a diuretic for, high blood pressure and that would affect your continence, right? And that would make it even more challenging for you to use those facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, medication side effects, any sort of bladder, prostate issues, any sort of, GI issues in general, if you need the bathroom a lot. And then, like you said, pregnant mothers, they need to be able to get to the bathroom quickly, right? Someone who maybe ate something bad in the food court and needs to run to the bathroom, right? Like,
or if you have a young child.
You have a young child who tells you at the last second that they need to go to the bathroom now.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Like, that's one of those things where it's like accessibility is not just for the disabled and for the elderly. Accessibility is for everybody.
It's for everybody.
And a point that you made earlier is like with these ADA and UD principles, the ownership for access is placed on the person who needs the accessibility. And that is really difficult, I think. And I also think that that's not fair because we're saying like, well, you need the accessibility, so you're going to have to go through these extra hoops to be able to access what you want to access.
Right, like it's your fault.
Right, exactly, right? Like I think of like the phone, right? The number of people I've helped with accessibility settings on their phones, right? Smartphones, especially the iPhone. I love how many options there are, but it's so hard to get to them for someone who doesn't know how to navigate a smartphone, right? Or someone who can't read everything because they're trying to get to accessibility to increase the font, but they can't because it's so small. So how do they do that? Right?
Yeah. So that goes back again to that break. There's a break somewhere that makes it difficult for you to like go to that destination, like go to the goal that you want to be able to go. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's hard too, because you're like, okay, well then how do you design something in a way where everyone can access everything without having to go through extra hoops? And I think that's exactly what you focus on, right? And that's exactly what you were saying with inclusive design is where it's accessible to everybody, regardless of what they need. And even for us, like I wouldn't mind larger font. Like I don't need the small font. I can read it, but it doesn't mean that one, it's probably not good for our eyes. And then two, we don't need it. If it's larger, everyone can read it.
Everyone can read it. It's just easier to use. Again, it all boils down to the experience. It's a positive experience for most people.
Yeah. One of the terms that I've also heard recently that another guest actually mentioned was adaptive design.
Adaptive design.
Yeah. So have you heard of that? And how would you like explain the difference between inclusive and adaptive?
Well, I would consider that as like a part of inclusive design because inclusive design has to be flexible because the reality is we're so diverse as a population, right? There's really no way to meet everyone's needs. But if you have a design feature that could be flexible or could be adapted to a specific need, then you're extending the capability of that design feature. And another thing to consider is also we cannot just rely on the physical design of the space. Like you have to consider what services are there. If the built environment or the physical space cannot meet the need, would there be an attendant that would be able to help me be able to do the occupation that I need to do at that context? Is there technology available? Is there a specific schedule that would make it easier for me to be in that space? So all those things should be flexible.
Yeah. I think that was the point of that too, of like saying like when you're preparing to, we were actually talking about aging in place, and in the home, when you're trying to design stuff,
Right.
it needs to be adaptive and not just accessible,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Because you never know when something can happen,
Exactly.
and you need to be able to adapt that to what you need. You've had a ton of experience working with different levels of our environment, from city to local to state to national, to talking about it at a national and world stages. What do you think is the hardest part about designing inclusive environments when you think about it from like a logistical, legal, infrastructure standpoint?
The most challenging part for me is really the buy-in of the decision makers, because you really have to be able to communicate the value of designing things with inclusivity in mind and really communicate that persuasively. Like you have to be persuasive. And because once you have that, then it's easier for them to agree with what you're
Yeah.
recommending. Like, okay, this is really great. This is something that we would like to be able to do, let's say, at our airport. And it's also important to have people who are already passionate about inclusive design. Let's say, for example, I was working with a client for an international airport. It's a busy airport. It's a huge airport, but it has done some remodeling and renovations, but they still want the entire experience to be pleasant for the passengers. So what they did was they asked us to do an accessibility audit. And the great thing about that was we were able to work with an architecture firm that is led by a person with disability, which is great because they really
Wow.
focus on the ADA aspect of the airport, whereas I was able to leverage my skill as an OT to
Yeah.
actually do an analysis of like the passenger journey. So we were able to do like a passenger journey analysis. That means like, how would this space be experienced by a person who is just exiting the airplane, who's deplaning and then going through the airport until that person gets to a train or an Uber? What are those barriers, and what are those supportive features that are already there, and how can we make that consistent? So being able to analyze those different features that could be barriers or opportunities, they really appreciated that.
Yeah.
Because those contribute to the overall passenger experience.
Absolutely. And I think that is so cool. Like, what a neat way to be able to use your OT skills.
Yeah, it was so fun to do, and
Yeah.
it was such a time crunch. I was still able to, because it was just the process of being able to spot things that could be improved, and at the same time also envision something that would really be helpful for passengers. Like, say, for example, it could be a recommendation of like maybe the sculptures would be something that could be used as wayfinding. So it's not just an artwork, but it actually would tell somebody, okay, that is where I started, and then there's another different sculpture there. So that's where I'm supposed to go based on this map. So
Yeah.
it's easier to remember rather than like, oh, these things are very similar. And just as simple as being able to identify a signage at a restroom with like a really busy background, and then the icon for the bathroom is really hard
Yeah.
to see because of that. But they did it as an artwork, right? The intention was there, but it's not, when you look at it, it's really hard
Yeah.
to see if that's a bathroom sign.
Right.
So those little things, like, it's not a part of the ADA, right, necessarily. I think that when we ground ourselves in occupations, that means like, okay, what are the people doing when they're in this space? What are
Right.
they trying to do? And how is this environment going to support that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They're using a bathroom. They're washing their hands. They're changing a baby.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
there's so many things. And I like what you said about a lot of places try to make things visually aesthetic. And sometimes that design takes away from accessibility features.
Right.
And it's like, okay, accessibility features don't have to be black and white, but they also need to be accessible and readable. And so, it might take away from your artsy aesthetic a little bit, but how can you make it look nice and still make it so that it's easy for someone to be able to find it?
Yeah.
And for the landmarks too, I feel like they have to be structures that are not going to change, right? Because if
Exactly.
you're creating a visual map of landmarks for someone to follow, then a single change in that is going to throw that person off.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So it has to be
exactly.
stuff that's not going to be moved or changed.
Yeah.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be landmarks. It doesn't have to be signage. even the layout of the space would make it intuitive for people to navigate it.
Yeah.
Like it could be like there's a main artery, like, okay, when I get lost, I just follow this main artery
Right.
of like this space and I will figure out where to go from here.
Yeah. Versus walking in and there's 5 different ways you
Yeah,
can
and
go.
then they're all similar, right?
Yeah,
Like
they're all
it's
the
so
same.
confusing.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes too, another problem that I always see in buildings is that, when the sun goes down and it reflects on a really shiny, it's beautiful floor surface, so shiny, so clean, but the glare is like right on your face and it's so
Yes.
difficult to see a lot of things.
Yes, yes, it is. I can relate with that related to driving. So, especially driving in the city. So, I used to have really, really bad glare with my eyes, with my eyesight. And so, driving at night when it's raining in the city, everything just glares, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
the water on the road is glaring from the traffic
Yeah.
lights. The buildings
mirror.
are glaring. Yeah, the buildings are mirrors, right? Like
Yes.
all the lights are reflecting off of them. And so I think almost like 2 years, I didn't drive at night. I couldn't drive at night anymore. And it's really hard for people, right? Like that is your freedom to go do whatever you need to be able to do. And I had to rely on my husband or like a ride share or something to be able to get somewhere if it was after dark.
Yeah, exactly.
And it wasn't even just like a nighttime, right? Like it's after dark, which like in the winters is at 4 o'clock. So getting home from work,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
it was like all these little things, and that made me so much more conscious too of, I think, like,
Yeah.
wow, people with visual disabilities, deficits, just like it's so hard to be able to manage certain things
Yeah.
if just the simplest thing is
Simplest
hard,
thing.
right?
And it could accumulate too.
It could
Like-
get progressively worse.
Yeah, yeah. And can you imagine if you're already stressed during that
Yeah.
time because of something happened at work and
Right.
you're in that situation, which is like another stress level.
Right.
And it just like shows you that the built environment could really affect how you do your occupations. It could create occupational
Yeah.
deprivation because you wouldn't want to be in that situation. Therefore, you're going to avoid that.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting. I know we've been talking about airports a lot, but I just had a patient who got injured overseas and flew home, flew back here for care.
Ooh, that's quite challenging.
And I was so interested in learning about how they did that because this person ended up getting an amputation internationally because of the injury. It was a crush injury. And fractures on the other leg.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, like this patient flew home on a 9-hour flight. I think it was 9 or 10 hours.
So
And
long.
then they flew into O'Hare and then came straight to the hospital. And we're just like, how did you do this? How did you get from like wheelchair to seat to like whatever, because you can't use your legs.
Right, yeah.
And I just think about it because I fly a lot and I'm like, I can't imagine how someone would do this on a plane. Like our slide board transfers or our scooting transfers. I'm like, because my biggest pet peeve on airplanes is that the aisle armrest doesn't go up.
Yes. Yes.
And I assume there's a reason for that. But the fact that aisle armrest can't go up means someone can't slide into
yeah.
a seat.
Yeah. I mean, my experience, I was able to like pull it up. Like there's a button that you can like lift up.
For the aisle one?
For the aisle one. Yeah.
Oh.
And I always do that whenever, it's time to like go to the bathroom or get my bag.
Interesting. Okay.
But then it's still an access issue, right? Because why would it be so difficult for you to figure that one out?
Why is it different from the other ones?
Yeah, why is it not standardized? Like even if in your you're traveling internationally and you're in a business class, right, where you were able to like really straighten up, a lot of those buttons, they're very difficult to locate.
Mm-hmm. They're hard to push, hard to locate.
Hard to locate because of a lack of contrast. And there's a time when during the flight they dim the light.
Mm-hmm.
And what if you drop something like your eyeglasses, right? Or your AirPods?
Yeah,
for
you have to
some
call the
reason.
flight attendant, but then you have to be able to see the button for that.
Yes, exactly. So all those little challenges, it's already very tight and so stressful and you don't have enough sleep. And then you go at an airport where it's like, it's even another layer of challenges that you have to go through.
Right. You mentioned something earlier about the most challenging part being buy-in when you're talking to city officials or large government bodies to implement inclusive design principles. Why do you think it's so challenging? Like, why do you think people genuinely don't understand why making something more accessible would be better ROI for them?
Because they've always done things the same way for a real long time. Sometimes, most of the time, change is difficult, right? Like, you're so comfortable to doing things a certain way, so we'll just keep doing it until there's some real issues and we have to address it. So it's very reactive as opposed to being proactive about it. Another reason for that is, they see it as a checklist. Like, we're meeting this, we're accessible.
Federally,
But how would that translate to an actual experience? And that's where we as OTs have the capability to translate that. Because we are used to working one-on-one with patients, right? With our clients. Like, we know how that transfer would go, what those specific challenges are. So we're able to translate that, okay, with this setup, this is how it's going to be experienced. And that's why when I create a document for our client, I always translate those into how this could be experienced by people, like actual quotes by people.
Yeah, like how does this change it for them?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's more relatable. They can relate to it emotionally. Like, for example, part of the document is about bathrooms, right? And one of the quotes that was there is I hope I'm not going to make a mess. Because sometimes that would be a concern for wheelchair users. Like, what if they fall and nobody's there to help them? So relating it to actual experiences, to the occupational experience, would make it more potent and really would make it more human, as opposed to these are just standards.
Yeah. I feel like you have to carry around, how in OT school, in lab, we would have to put on those visual deficit goggles and try to navigate the environment, or use a knee scooter and try to navigate the environment. It's almost like you have to bring those in and be okay, I want you to try and walk through your building with these glasses on and see how you do.
It's funny you mentioned that, because we, as part of educating our architects, our team, that's actually one of the things that we did. We have this simulation, but of course, it doesn't always give the exact picture of how this is experienced by people, but it is more interactive. It made them appreciate these are the things that is experienced. So it made their learning about inclusive design a lot more engaging.
I love that. Yeah. And that's what it is, right? I think even as an OT, I don't think, if we haven't had that lived experience, it's really hard for us to be I know that this is going to make this better for you, right?
Yes.
Most of our work is rooted in past experiences, evidence, research, all of that, right? But very little of our work is rooted in lived experience, because all of us haven't experienced everything. And an example of that is I work in the hospital. I have worked with many people after orthopedic injuries, right? And I'm telling them about how to navigate their stairs or navigate their bathroom, or how to take a shower, how to get dressed. I went and almost fractured my foot, and then I was non-weight bearing for a few days, and then I was in a brace for 3 weeks, a boot, and trying to navigate my house in that. I was I will never say this to a patient again. There were certain things where it was this is really hard. And I'm trying to follow my own advice and my own suggestions that I've given others. Yeah. And then I'm this doesn't actually work. So why are we teaching patients this?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And of course, certain things work for certain people and not for other people, and that's fine. But I think the general principles that we use work for some and don't work for others.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think it's similar with design. Most design works for some and not for others.
Yeah.
And so you do the work of trying to make it so that how can it work for everybody?
Yes. And that's another strength with OTs, because we have the breadth. We have worked with a variety of patients, but we don't have the depth as compared to a person with a lived experience who's a wheelchair user, or a person with a chronic condition. We don't have that depth, but we have the breadth, because we studied it in school. We've worked with a lot of patients. Combining the breadth and depth at the same time is really powerful. And back it up with evidence, literature review. What are the most effective strategies for this type of situation? Yeah. So that could even be more powerful. And I hope, that will just be more common as we design more buildings and places.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a couple thoughts as you were talking about the patient experience with the airport. And one was, I really appreciate you talking about something that's different from the sensory rooms, because I've seen a lot of work by a lot of wonderful OT practitioners in airports designing sensory friendly rooms, areas. And of course, that's necessary in most public places.
Right.
And so I think that's definitely an area where like OT is a star. But I love that you're talking about like the patient experience and what actually navigating an environment is like for people. And then the second part is, do you find that? So I've also had a lot of experience in the tech space, and I feel like with every new tech product or website or app, there's this whole component, usually a whole department dedicated to user experience.
Yes.
We don't have that in built spaces.
We don't. And that's why OTs are really so primed for that. And that's actually one of the reasons why I find it easier, because I did a lot of UX boot camps before. And I saw the parallel between like the UX
it is.
and
Yeah.
OT. And it's just like in OT, we're manipulating three-dimensional objects. We're moving around a three-dimensional space, as opposed to like UX, which is like icons and fonts and the swiping and all that. But the goal is to be able to do what you want to be able to do with that technology or within that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also wonder, like, from a buy-in standpoint, like, do you think that that could ever be helpful of like making that parallel of saying like, hey, all these tech companies have entire user experience like departments.
Yes.
But in the built environment, we don't have that same user experience department for
Yes.
built environments. Like,
Oh,
do you
definitely.
think it helps?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, some airports actually have a team of passenger experience professionals.
Okay.
Right. And those are the types of professionals that we as OTs can work with, because they understand all those different aspects of the experience, whether it's like a barrier, or whether it's like lighting or even music. And sometimes we even incorporate environmental psychology, because, again, we're not just physical beings, we're psychological, emotional beings.
Yeah.
How can a specific look, whether it's like a curved surface, affect your ability to just be able to be relaxed in a stressful environment?
Yeah. You don't want the sharp edges.
No, there's actually research.
I know.
Right?
I only know this because of, again, digitally, when you work with graphic design for like designing logos and company brands, they tell you that, because they're like, what kind of emotion do you want your clients to, like, what kind of emotions do you want to invoke in your potential clients? And it's
Right.
like, if you're sharp and like if it's all sharp and with edges and stuff, then it shows that you're like very formal, very like direct, very
Efficient.
like it's just like hard skills, right?
Right,
Like
yeah.
very hard. But if it's soft, then it's like more inviting and calming, and
Right.
it's like, oh, we'll be more collaborative, and it's
Yes.
more so that makes sense from a built environment space too. If it's there's more curves than
More
rounds.
curves,
and-
exactly. In furniture, and it doesn't have to be like an actual three-dimensional shape. It could be in the print of the wallpaper or on the floor. Another thing that's also getting more traction these days is the use of fractals. That means like those patterns in nature. They're using it on flooring, on wallpaper, because we humans, we without the built space, right? Like we're
natural environment.
Yeah, we're in a natural environment. So we've been surrounded by these natural patterns for a significant amount of our time as humans.
Yeah.
So we're able to be comfortable in that kind of setting. And if we apply the same kind of pattern in our built environment, it would relax us. It would not trigger a whole lot of cortisol, which is like the stress hormone. So those types of things, again, that's like beyond ADA.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I doubt ADA even has a section on calming emotional skills or like
Yes.
emotional environment. What you're saying though is I should probably make this frame more rounded. Huh?
No, it has like a natural...
It has the fractals.
Yeah, it has fractal patterns. I couldn't quite see it from here, but yeah.
Out of all the projects you've done, is there one that you have really enjoyed that you can share?
So a lot of the projects that I'm working in right now are in progress. So it's still not out there.
Right.
So we have signed an NDA with the
Of
client, so I
course.
can't really
No, but
tell
ones
you.
you've done in the past that you can talk about.
The ones that I've done in the past, I did an inclusive bathroom for a college. And it's really it's one of the very first projects that I did as an inclusive design lead for the firm. And what the college wanted to do is that they want to be able to convert the gender segregated bathroom, male, female, into like one inclusive bathroom. And so we were trying to figure out, okay, how can we make this work with this limited space? We want it to be accessible as well, but at the same time, we also want to offer privacy and safety at the same time. So I did a lot of research on, what the current trends are or what the available evidence is as far as inclusive bathroom design, and actually talk to people. Like, how would you feel if you are using this bathroom and then another person with a different gender in the other stall? Like, how would that make you feel? And it actually varied.
Yeah.
Like, for the younger folks, like they
Don't care.
They're fine.
Yeah.
But for older folks, they seem to be like kind of wary about it.
Right.
So like it's all about like balancing that privacy, like putting more wall surface so that you can feel like you have that, you can
Privacy,
relax, like
yeah.
nobody's going to bother you, or you won't hear other noises,
Yeah.
because sometimes that could be uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Like whether it's coming from the other person or coming from you, that bodily noise is
Right.
like,
I mean, bathrooms are some of the most vulnerable
Yes,
places,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so you have to be mindful of that.
Yes.
That's really cool, though.
Yeah.
And also kudos to the school on like trying
Yeah.
to figure
Yeah.
out like the most inclusive way. And something that triggered, again, setting something we learn in OT school, you're doing constant needs assessments.
Yes.
Constant, and like asking the people what they want, and then
Asking the client
and
what
asking
they
the
want.
client and the client.
Yeah, 'cause, like-
well, your clients in this case like was a college, right? But you're
a college.
asking the users,
The
right?
users,
So like the
right.
students or the faculty
Yes.
or whoever it might be about how they would feel, right?
Yeah.
And so you're doing a needs assessment,
Yeah.
collecting.
You're like balancing
feedback.
it too, because the client might have like a certain preference, like they might already have like a certain design standard that you have to work around.
Yeah, colors.
Yes, the color
schemes.
schemes, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's just their preference, like the decision maker's preference, like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want this. But the good thing about working with our teams, like we always like present a variety of options,
Yeah.
but making sure that we integrate as much inclusive design features in those options. Like for example, one of the things, and this is another fun activity that I got to do with my inclusive design intern during that time. This was last spring, late summer, as well as with our architecture interns, because they started at the same time and ended at the same time. So they got to work on a project, which is an inclusive design school. So they're divided into 4 groups, and each of them developed a concept of how this school would look like with all the inclusive design features that are there. And it was just like such an amazing experience, both for myself, my intern, the architecture interns, they got to work together. And that's one of the goals that I have in having OT capstone students work with us, because we want them to also be able to work with other interns and architects, professionals, and having that kind of an idea what our role is and how we can bring value to the design team.
Yeah, it's so important. And I do love that OT students now have the ability to have these experiences. I still remember, I mean, at this point it was 15 years ago, but maybe 13 years ago, but like I did a project on the collaborative role of OTs and architects working together. And it's so like almost full circle to see that like this is actually happening. Like you
Yes.
actually work at an architecture firm. Do you find, I still not normal, right? Like this is not something that's standard.
It's
or
not,
at
yeah,
all.
it's not
I don't know
everywhere.
a single other OT who works in architecture, right? Do you feel that this is now like going to start becoming a little more normalized and a little more accessible? And do you think more architecture firms or design firms are going to kind of pick up on this and start maybe wanting to hire accessibility experts, OTs, or whatever in that space?
Well, that is my hope.
Yeah.
And that's why we're partnering with OT programs, because we want to create that pipeline for future OTs to prepare themselves for this kind of work. But right now, I'm doing a lot of advocating for the role of OT in design firms, and hopefully that would catch designers' attention, and it has. Based on my interactions during design events like South by Southwest, NeoCon, they are curious about what we're capable of doing and how we actually use our skills and what OT actually is, because that is the main thing,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
not just architects and designers who do not quite understand what we do, but it's the same with the general population. They really
Don't know what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's great, because I was going to say it's great that we're preparing students for this option, but what if those opportunities don't exist? But you're also
Yes.
speaking at architecture and design conferences where you can share what
Yes.
we do and hopefully open up more and more firms.
I'm working on both sides.
Yeah,
right?
you're doing all the work.
Because that's how strategy is.
Yeah.
Like you can't just focus on one solution and expect like, the rest will just work out.
Just
So-
because we bleed out 100 OTs who want to work
Exactly.
in architecture firms doesn't mean there's going to be 100 architecture
Yes.
firms who are
Yeah.
looking to hire an
Yeah.
OT.
And I think that's one of our strengths as OTs too, because we're systems thinker, right? Like we know what is causing this problem. And it's not just one problem.
Yeah.
It's like several others. So by
Yeah.
being able to identify those factors, then we're able to address those
Yeah.
and address them together so that our solution would be more powerful compared to just like addressing one problem with one solution.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been such a great conversation, Francisco. Is there any like takeaway or like leading thought that you want to leave us with?
Oh boy. So I think one thought is that I would assume a lot of OTs are watching or listening to this is that we really have to recognize and really own the fact that we have a role in how our built environment is designed, whether it's homes, the parks, airports, because we know how those affect the occupations that we do every day.
Yeah, absolutely. This was so great. Thank you so much for joining me, Francisco.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the Aging Together podcast. If today's conversation helped you, please follow the show, share it with a friend, or leave a quick rating or review. Your support keeps this podcast free, ad light, and growing. Until next time, let's keep learning and aging together. Take care.